What happens when children become soldiers in Mexico's drug war? On October 2, 2025, in the hills above Zamora, Michoacán, a routine patrol turned into a brutal firefight that would expose one of the darkest realities of modern cartel operations. This is the story of Operation Primero de Mayo, where Mexican security forces uncovered not just a narco camp, but a systematic machine that turns teenagers into armed sentinels. 3 bodies, 4 arrests, and a discovery that would shake Mexico's security establishment to its core. Zamora, Michoacán. Wednesday, October 2nd, 9:23 p.m. Darkness had already swallowed the landscape when the silence was shattered by gunfire. This wasn't a stray bullet. It was a declaration of war in the rugged terrain of Colonia Primero de Mayo, where thick night air hung between abandoned orchards and dogs barked at shadows. A group of armed men opened fire on a Mexican army patrol. What followed wasn't just an operation, it was a hunt. In less than 20 minutes, federal forces including the Army, State Prosecutor's Office, and National Guard converged on the hillside like it was a foreign combat zone. Gunshots echoed against rocks, the smell of gunpowder mixed with damp earth and the sweat of fear. At the top of the hill, between torn tarps and sacks of animal feed, stood the epicenter of everything, a narco camp. Rustic, improvised, but very real. 3 bodies lay scattered among branches and empty cement bags, faces unrecognizable, tactical clothing. Beside them, 2 AR-15-style rifles, a pistol, and a partially burned notebook. 4 survivors were captured before midnight. 2 of them were barely teenagers, trembling not from cold, but because they knew what they'd lost wasn't just a battle, but the silence, the pact that had kept them hidden, shattered in an instant. That night, forensic experts walked the area with headlamps and surgical masks. They collected shell casings, took photographs, and wrapped the bodies in gray sheets. They were transported as unknowns, but the faces of those who fired weren't new to the region. A local commander who requested anonymity said only one phrase: "We already knew they were here. We just needed someone brave enough to go up there." Because that forgotten hill on the maps, surrounded by nameless roads, wasn't just a geographical point. It was an open wound, occupied territory, and that night the state decided to reclaim it. Omar Garcia Harfuch, Mexico's federal security secretary, was notified at 11:16 p.m. The institutional response was swift, cold, and uncompromising. Today we didn't respond to an aggression. Today we went after them, and we won't give up another meter. But what they found in that camp went far beyond weapons and fake uniforms. Hidden in the undergrowth was something more, something that hasn't been fully told yet. Colonia Primero de Mayo doesn't appear in Michoacán's postcards. It's a labyrinth of dirt roads, sheet metal roofs, and hills that blur between fog and rusted antennas. There are no security cameras here, only rumors. And one particular rumor had been repeated for months. There's strange movement up there, but nobody dares to see what. For weeks, residents reported lights turning on at dawn, lights that weren't from houses, lights that went out when someone asked questions. They also spoke of trailers climbing impossible roads, of drones, and of a voice everyone had heard at least once: "You don't go up here." Wednesday night, State Prosecutor's Office agents received an anonymous alert. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. No names, just a location and a warning. They're about to move. If you don't arrive today, tomorrow, you'll find nothing. The message coincided with an investigation opened weeks earlier. A National Guard report warned about the installation of at least 3 camps in rural areas of Zamora, one of them in Primero de Mayo. But until that moment, everything was theory. At 9:11 p.m., the convoy left in silence. No sirens, only low lights and strict orders. Go up, confirm, secure. Don't shoot unless they shoot first. The climate was humid, the ground slippery, and with each step the bushes seemed to move on their own. Officers advanced in a line, sweating under their vests, listening to their breathing amplified by tactical headsets. And then it happened. A flash, a single shot, and then the darkness filled with fire. From a height of at least 15 meters, the aggressors began firing with automatic rifles. Federal agents rolled onto the ground, sought cover behind rocks, and shouted over the radio one word: contact. What seemed like a routine patrol became a total assault, and in that instant everything changed. Because that hill, abandoned by the government and occupied by crime, was more than a hideout. It was a key point, a node, and what they were about to discover there was unlike anything they'd seen before. The first detonation was dry, without warning. A bullet pierced through a tree branch and grazed a National Guard agent's helmet. There was no time for warnings, only reaction. Respond. The entire hill lit up as if an electrical storm had exploded without clouds. Burst came from an improvised trench made with stones, tarps, and sacks. And from there, at least 7 figures moved like fast shadows. They knew the terrain, knew every curve, every slope, and they fired with precision that wasn't improvised. Officers retreated in tactical formation. Some threw themselves to the ground, others covered flanks, and 2 army elements climbed stealthily up the opposite slope seeking to flank. Smoke from bullets floated over the undergrowth like thick fog. The sound was deafening. Metal, screams, loose earth, radio orders. One of the attackers, tall and thin, with a black balaclava, descended firing in bursts. He carried an AR-15 and a cap with fake insignias. When he tried to change position, a shot reached him. He fell without screaming and didn't move again. That was the first casualty, but the fire didn't cease. 2 more continued firing from a cave camouflaged with branches. The shootout lasted 14 minutes and then silence. Only the echoes of battle remained, and the smell. Hot gunpowder, sour sweat, contained fear. One by one, agents began advancing with weapons raised, with flashlights cutting through the darkness. And there, among stones and cement sacks, they found the bodies. 3 face down, covered faces, tactical boots, weapons still in their hands. But what caught the most attention wasn't the weaponry, it was the terrain. A camp made with black tarps, plates with still warm food remains, charred notebooks, and something more. Cameras connected to car batteries. They were watching, they were waiting, and they were ready to escape. In a corner of the camp, almost buried among dry leaves, an agent found a backpack. Inside, a handwritten list with names, dates, and coordinates. But what was at the end of that list made the field commander request immediate reinforcements. He was 17 years old, with small hands, swollen eyes, and a voice broken by fear. When they handcuffed him, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He asked for his mom. He was one of 4 detained. His clothes were muddy. He carried a children's backpack with skull drawings and had minor leg injuries. According to the medical report, he showed no signs of torture or struggle. He didn't shoot. He just ran. But the other one did shoot, 15 years old. He aimed, pulled the trigger, and when they subdued him, his finger was still cramped on the weapon's grip. The commander who arrested him wrote something in his log he'd never written before. Children with the gaze of war. Among the 4 detained, 3 were minors, and 1, the oldest, had an outstanding arrest warrant from a year ago. They knew him in the area. They called him El Gato. He was the one who knew how to hide weapons in cement sacks and coordinate shifts in the hills. But that night, he didn't manage to escape. They were transported to the public prosecutor's office with heads down. One cried silently, another murmured rap songs. The youngest had a dog bite on his ankle, and the 4th asked if what was in the truck was a coffin. They didn't know what they'd provoked. They didn't understand the magnitude of the fire they'd unleashed, or the response they were about to receive. In the camp, they found remains of bottles, medicine wrappers, canned food, portable batteries, and a school notebook with weapon drawings. Everything improvised, everything prepared to resist for days, but not a night like that. The Forensic Services Unit cordoned off the perimeter until 3 a.m. They photographed each body, collected each shell casing, and tagged each object with surgical gloves and flashlights that seemed like light scalpels. At 4:12 a.m., the 3 slain bodies were transferred to the morgue. None with official identification, all with the same haircut, the same black boots, and the same silence stamped on their faces. Colonia Primero de Mayo is barely an urban edge, but behind the hill, Where undergrowth swallows the roads and cell signals fade, there's something more. A corridor, an escape route, a passage connecting Zamora with Tangancicuaro, with Jacona, and beyond to Tierra Caliente. That mountain wasn't just a hideout. It was a control tower, a watchtower. From there they monitored convoy movements, drones, patrols, and something more. Rural roads used for trafficking. The coordinates found in the camp backpack confirmed it. They marked meeting points, passes between hills, paths impassable for vehicles but ideal for foot transfers, messenger routes or mules. The prosecutor's office found hand-drawn maps with routes flanked by houses marked with an X. According to intelligence analysis, those marks identified safe points, places to hide or store something. It wasn't the first time something like this appeared in Michoacán, but it was the first time it was located so close to Zamora's urban core. The notebook seemed harmless, covered in mud, with burned corners. But when forensic experts opened it, the change was immediate. These weren't notes or jottings. It was a movement registry, a timed log of people, dates, and codes. And at the bottom, a word written in red ink, underlined twice. Relief. According to the intelligence team, that word appears in very specific contexts. Operational cell change, sentinel substitution, or armed personnel rotation. The notebook was written by someone with training. There were blocks with initials, coded locations, nighttime activity schedules. But the most alarming was a section with symbols, and under one of them, a name. Base R3. Active. Miners in position. The discovery shook everyone and confirmed what nobody wanted to assume. There was a network operating with miners as cannon fodder, a structure that sent the youngest to the front line and protected itself from the shadows. That clue appeared in another part of the camp, a phone hidden under a rock. When they managed to turn it on, they found a single number dialed repeatedly, saved under the name Tio Lalo, Uncle Lalo. But the disturbing thing wasn't the contact, it was what was in the chat. Coordinates, orders, and messages with a repeated signature. We continue under TZ7 instruction. That code had already been detected in other operations in the country's west, related to logistics, recruitment, and tactical movements of organized crime. But what paralyzed the analysis team wasn't that, it was a voice note. An audio, 11 seconds, hoarse voice and a message that froze everyone's blood. If they fall, replace them. You know where. Make sure there's no shortage. Keep your guard up. It was a protocol, a systematized order to replace the fallen as if they were interchangeable pieces, as if their lives weren't worth more than a line in a notebook. And then, from Mexico City came the order that would change everything. Omar Garcia Harfuch assumed total control of the case. The report arrived at his office at 2:24 a.m. The tone of the report was technical, cold, but what it said was anything but common. Armed miners, active coordinates, camp with tactical monitoring, and a network operating under the TZ7 protocol. Omar Garcia Harfuch didn't need a meeting. He just read the header and gave the order that would mark the case's direction. Deploy second ring. Seal access within 50 kilometers. Nobody leaves, nobody enters. Today, the state responds with all its force. Minutes later, in coordination with SEDINA, Ministry of National Defense, Regional Red Code was activated. That meant one thing: immediate interinstitutional intervention and tactical intelligence presence on the ground. Harfuch knew what happened wasn't an isolated operation. It was a symptom. An advanced cell infiltrated in the urban periphery with miners, as the visible face and a shadow behind. A command network that still hadn't shown its face. From the command center in Mexico City, he ordered total access to traffic cameras, IME tracking of seized cell phones, and satellite review of rural routes between Zamora, Jacona, and Tangancicuaro. His phrase was clear: this isn't a nest, it's an arm, and we're going to cut it from the root. At dawn, specialized units departed from Morelia toward the zone, equipped with night vision, thermal detectors, K9 units, and rapid intervention teams. The instruction wasn't just to capture, it was to map, understand, and anticipate the next movement. In a meeting with state prosecutor's office commanders, Harfuch was direct. We're no longer talking about criminals. We're talking about a structure that normalized putting weapons in children's hands, and that in this country we will not allow. What disturbed the secretary most wasn't the violence, it was the coldness of the recovered message. If they fall, replace them. That phrase didn't just dehumanize, it revealed a system, machinery that doesn't depend on names but on function, and that's harder to destroy. That's why the response wasn't just media-driven, it was surgical, silent and total. When the sun began illuminating Zamora's hills, the operation had already ended, but the violence had only changed form. In Colonia Primero de Mayo, people came out cautiously, windows remained closed, curtains down, and children who normally played among stone walls and twisted trees didn't come out. Not as punishment, but from fear. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air. The earth still showed military boot prints, and on some house walls remained marks, stray bullets, pieces of splintered wood, a children's backpack hanging on the gate of an abandoned house. On social media, rumors grew that the dead were outsiders, that the detained were locals, that one of them studied at a telesecondaria less than 3 kilometers away, and that someone from the town, someone known, was the one who turned them in. Fear stopped being abstract. It had direction and a last name. In the streets, people spoke in whispers. They say they were from the other side of the hill. One lived with his grandmother. They used him and released him. The prosecutor's office confirmed that at least 2 of those detained were from Zamora minors without criminal records, but with digital links to profiles used by criminal cells in Apatzingan and La Piedad. The news spread like wildfire. Children used as lookouts, armed children, children sent to die. And with that revelation came another, even more painful one. The mother of one of the slain presented herself at the morgue Thursday morning. She carried a photo. She showed it without speaking. The coroner nodded. She fainted. Her son was 16 years old. The local press avoided showing his face, but neighbors already knew. He was quiet, played soccer. We saw him every afternoon. What the operation left wasn't just a dismantled camp, it was a broken mirror, because it was no longer just about cartels or armed cells, but about a generation growing up between fake uniforms, borrowed rifles, and empty promises. The news crossed the country in minutes. Zamora, Michoacán. 3 killed, 4 detained, a dismantled camp, and one fact that changed everything: armed minors as the first line of defense. Images began circulating. The covered face of a handcuffed teenager, the ruined camp, confiscated weapons on a metal table. National media picked up the case. Analysts debated whether it was forced recruitment or a voluntary decision. But in Colonia Primero de Mayo, labels didn't matter. What mattered was the emptiness. The empty chair at the table, the notebook without an owner, the gaze of a grandmother who never spoke again. From the National Palace, a message of solidarity was issued. But the statement that really went viral was different. Omar Garcia Harfuch, standing in front of a board with coordinates, maps, and photographs, said only this: "Today we returned a hill to the state. But it's not enough to recover territory, we must recover the future. And that isn't done with bullets. It's done with presence." The phrase was replicated on portals, newscasts, and social networks because it didn't sound like politics. It sounded like truth. Harfuch ordered reinforcement of intervention with educational, psychological, and community presence. He sent teams for attention to at-risk minors and, most importantly, activated early prevention protocols for rural areas throughout Michoacán, because he understood something that goes beyond the operation. Crime doesn't just recruit soldiers anymore, it recruits desperation. And where there's abandonment, there's flesh ready for the rifle. That night, as patrols withdrew, a child walked with his mother toward the store. Passing by the hill, the mother took his hand and said quietly, "Don't look up there anymore." But the child did look and asked, "Do the bad guys live there?" She didn't respond, because sometimes there are no answers, and that's the real tragedy. The operation was successful. The state gained ground. But the country continues bleeding in silence. And if the next sentinel already has a name, already goes to middle school, and nobody is doing anything about it, then the cycle continues. This is the story of Operation Primero de Mayo, where victory on the battlefield couldn't hide the defeat of a society that's losing its children to the shadows, where strategic hills matter less than the broken homes at their base, and where the question remains: how many more hills are there with how many more children waiting for their turn to fall? The war isn't just fought with bullets. It's fought with hope, opportunity, and presence. And in Michoacán, that battle has only just begun.